Yes, they met. Yes, that was against William's wishes, but there was no sense that I'm getting that Charles laid out the red carpet for Harry.
This is the sort of meeting that the king does with strangers. It's not the sort of meeting that he does with loved ones.
Sussexes only will talk to people who repeat their own narrative.
Yes.
And who they can control. So the idea that you could get the truth from the Sussexes is contradiction.
This man, I think, will be asking Dad for a little bit more money very, very quickly. I only see bad things on the horizon.
Meghan Markle breaks her agreement with King Charles and Buckingham Palace to leak to her friends at People magazine less than a week after that promised meeting with Charles and Queen Camilla.
Poison. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, not even a family dispute quietly buried behind palace walls poison. That was the word Tom Bower chose, and he didn't just throw it out for effect. He aimed it directly at Prince Harry, and the reason it landed like a detonation is because of what had just happened behind those Highgrove gates. Because while the world was still arguing about distance, security, and broken trust, King Charles did the one thing everyone insisted he never would. He opened the door. Not publicly, not ceremonially, but personally, quietly, dangerously, and here's where the story stops being soft and starts getting uncomfortable. Because this wasn't just a meeting. This was a test, a final, fragile offering from a father who has been described as unwell, still working, still carrying the crown while fighting battles nobody sees. And into that moment walked Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and two children who hadn't been seen by their grandfather in years. Think about that. 4 years. Silence that long doesn't just happen, it builds, it calcifies, it turns into something heavy, something risky.
They run out of ideas, they can't really more work for Netflix or Spotify or any of the main streamers, and their finances are basically in jeopardy over the long term.
Highgrove wasn't just a house that day. It became a stage without cameras, a negotiation without witnesses except one. Because sitting beside the king was Queen Camilla. No announcements, no photographers, no carefully scripted smiles, just a room, a table, and a rule so simple it almost felt impossible. Keep it private. That was it. One rule, one line drawn in absolute clarity. And the moment you hear that rule, you already feel the tension creeping in, don't you? Because history whispers something else. It says private moments in this story never stay private for long.
We get to Rob Shooting's new reporting over Prince William's reaction to that. He also alleges that King Charles is even shocked. Well, I'm not sure how shocked King Charles is, to be honest, given he's made this offer for Prince Harry to stay at Buckingham Palace. I think these days Charles just ignores what Harry is doing because he doesn't want to know the reality of quite how low his son, his youngest, has stooped.
Less than an hour. That's all it took. Less than an hour to reopen wounds, test loyalties, and create a moment the entire world would later dissect piece by piece. And then came the silence. Thick, suspicious, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels loaded. Because when something this delicate happens behind closed doors, the question isn't whether it will leak. The question is when, and who benefits when it does.
Prince Harry has in the past directly emailed People magazine. We know that People magazine effectively operates as like the house journal for the Sussexes, and we know that Meghan Markle wanted it to be known to the world that the choreography of this meeting was nothing to do with her.
Because let's not pretend this was just tea. The tea was irrelevant. The real story was the exchange. A father offering time, access, forgiveness, things money cannot buy. And what happens when something that rare is handed over? Is it protected or is it used? That's the question that started echoing the moment details began surfacing in places they were never supposed to reach. People magazine, the New York Times, 2 platforms, same timing, same direction of narrative. And suddenly, the private became public, but not in a neutral way, in a shaped way.
I don't think Meghan particularly wants to build any bridges with the UK or the royal family here. She's brought the children over because she wanted to support Harry and she wanted, like him, the kids to see their grandfather. But she's not as focused as he is on rehabilitating her image here. That matters to him. I don't think it matters to Meghan.
So now the ledger opens. Every detail starts to matter. Who arranged it? Who wanted it known? Because even before the leaks from across the Atlantic, something else had already happened. The initial confirmation didn't come from the Sussex side, it came from inside the palace itself. That matters. That tells you intent. It tells you that King Charles wanted it known that he had extended the olive branch, that he had opened the door, publicly, deliberately, almost like he was setting a stage and waiting to see what would happen next.
They're against it. They've been hugely damaged by the Sussexes. They're in no mood to forgive the Sussexes for all the lies they spewed out about them.
And what happened next is where the entire tone of this story shifts, because the arrival itself wasn't normal. It wasn't a front gate welcome. It wasn't waving to cameras. It was quiet, controlled, almost hidden, driven in through the back in a blacked out car disguised as something as ordinary as a garden visit. That's not how family reunions look. That's how operations look. That's how you move when trust has already been broken too many times. And yet, despite all that secrecy, despite all that control, within days, the narrative began to shift in public. A sympathetic version, a carefully positioned account. And if you look closely, the pattern starts to feel familiar. A private moment occurs. Then suddenly, a polished version of it appears in American media, carrying a tone, a direction, a subtle assignment of blame. This time, the shadow pointed toward Prince William. Again, and this is where the story stops being about one meeting and starts becoming about repetition. Because patterns don't lie. They stack, they build, they reveal intent without ever needing a direct confession. For 6 years, the same sequence has quietly unfolded moment, silence, leak, narrative, and every time, the same question lingers. Coincidence or design? Because the rule was clear. No photos, no publicity, no interviews, and yet somehow visibility found its way back in, not directly breaking the rule, but bending it, staying within the letter, ignoring the spirit. And that's what makes this more than just a disagreement. It turns it into something strategic, something calculated. And then comes the detail that changes everything, the part nobody can easily dismiss. For years, one argument stood like a wall. It wasn't safe to come back. Too dangerous, too risky. That was the explanation repeated over and over. But then this visit happened. Entry, exit, no chaos, no incidents, no threats, not even a stray photograph. Clean, quiet, controlled. So now the question hangs there. Heavier than ever what changed? Or what was never true to begin with? Because when reality contradicts a narrative this cleanly, it doesn't just raise doubts. It collapses the entire structure that narrative was built on. And suddenly, what looked like protection starts looking like leverage. What sounded like fear starts sounding like positioning. And people start asking questions they weren't asking before. And just when you think it can't get more complicated, it does. Because whispers begin about conditions, about expectations, about lists, who should be present, who shouldn't, and whether or not Queen Camilla was even wanted in that room. Imagine that, walking into a meeting you needed, on ground you didn't control, and still trying to shape the environment. That's not reconciliation. That's negotiation. And just when it feels like the story has already stretched to its breaking point, it twists again. Because what followed that Highgrove afternoon did not quietly fade into memory, it expanded, it echoed, it exposed something deeper that had been sitting underneath everything for years. Because once the dust of that meeting settled, the focus didn't stay on the tea, or the smiles, or even the fragile attempt at reconciliation. It shifted to behavior, patterns, consequences, and the cracks that started to show were not subtle. Because within the same window of time, Prince Harry walked straight into what many quietly described as the worst professional collapse of his public life. A courtroom defeat, not partial, not ambiguous. Comprehensive, public, final, the kind of loss that doesn't just damage a case, it damages perception. And in a world where image is currency, that kind of hit lands hard, really hard. But here's where the silence became louder than anything said out loud. Because while that moment unfolded, while headlines sharpened and opinions hardened, Meghan Markle was nowhere to be seen. No appearance. No alignment, no visual support during the exact moment it was most expected. And in a story built so heavily on optics that absence didn't feel accidental, it felt like a message. Because when someone chooses not to stand beside you at your lowest point, it doesn't just create distance. It reveals hierarchy, priorities, strategy, and suddenly, the Highgrove meeting starts to look different when you rewind it through that lens. Less like a shared step forward, more like a calculated move within a much larger plan that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. And then comes the part that turns discomfort into something much harder to ignore, because the conversation begins circling around the children, not emotionally, not personally. but structurally. Carefully, observationally, the idea that access, presence, timing, even visibility of Archie and Lilibet may not simply be family decisions, but leverage points, not statements implications, repeated from multiple directions. And that's where the tone shifts again, because once that possibility enters the narrative, it doesn't leave easily. It lingers. It reshapes every previous moment, including that Highgrove afternoon, into something that feels less organic and more orchestrated. Because if that meeting was about reconnection, why did it come wrapped in conditions? Why did it move through secrecy? Why did it exit through narrative framing? And why immediately after? Did it ripple outward in a way that seemed to benefit positioning more than healing? Those are the questions that start stacking, one on top of another, until the weight of them becomes impossible to ignore. And while all of this unfolds, something else quietly locks into place behind the scenes, the final barrier. Because while King Charles opened a door, even briefly, even cautiously, there is another door that remains firmly closed, and that door belongs to Prince William. No movement, no softening, no indication of change, and that matters more than anything else because it sets a limit, a ceiling, a point beyond which this entire situation may never pass, no matter how many meetings happen, no matter how many narratives shift, because reconciliation with one does not equal restoration with all. And in this case, that divide is not just emotional, it's structural, future-facing, permanent, and then, just as everything begins to settle into place, one final detail slips in quietly but carries enormous weight. Another invitation, another possibility, a September moment already being whispered about, already being positioned as the next step. And that's where everything circles back to the beginning. Because if Highgrove was a test, then the next meeting won't just be a continuation, it will be a verdict.